Welcome to the lecture for research methods. We'll be talking briefly today about some mistakes to avoid in your research paper. Things that I've seen other students do that you should avoid doing to make the best quality paper and earn the highest grade possible. First, we'll talk about some citation mistakes, some of which are related to the things we talked about before in terms of plagiarism. You obviously don't want to use any information from a source without giving credit to that source. Right? This is the most straightforward act of plagiarism, and this would end poorly for you if you were to do that. So make sure that if you got something from someplace and you used that idea, or especially those words, you need to cite the source where you got that. I don't see that too much. What I see more often is when people use information verbatim without indicating it is a quote. So they'll put a citation, put the author and the year, but they use the exact words of some other author. And when you do that, you need to indicate it's a quote by either putting it in quotation marks or doing a block indent if it's a long quote, and also including the page number from which the quote on which the quote appeared. And as I've told you before, try not to use too many quotes. I'd say, try to limit yourself to 2 quotes for the entire paper. If you go beyond that, then I'm not really grading your work, I'm grading the work of these other authors. Right? Another thing that I see sometimes, people don't cite something that isn't clearly general knowledge or that person's own opinion. If anything sounds like a fact, it should have a citation. And sometimes you want to include your opinion, but you state your opinion as a fact because you think your opinion is true. And that's fine. You just need to word it in such a way that it's clear that it is your opinion, and you're not stating it as if this is something that we've documented via empirical evidence. And then the last thing is make sure that all the citations in your text match the ones in your reference page. Everything that you cite in the paper, parenthetically, should appear on the reference page. Everything in the reference page should appear cited in the paper. There shouldn't be any mismatch whatsoever when comparing those two. In terms of spelling and grammar, it seems simple, but pay attention to the red or green squiggly lines that Microsoft Word generates in terms of spelling errors and grammatical errors. Word isn't always right, especially with the grammatical errors. Sometimes doing things the APA way is in contrast with what Word thinks is the grammatically appropriate thing. But typically they line up. So if you see the squiggly lines, at least look at it and think about it and make sure that you're spelling something correctly. You don't have extra spaces in somewhere. You don't have an incomplete clause, anything like that. Another thing that, again, you would think wouldn't need to say, but a sentence must have a subject and a predicate. You can't just have 2 prepositional phrases and call it a sentence. You have to have a subject, a verb, and an object. So we have the whole sentence there, not just a piece of a sentence. And if you have clauses that you're treating like independent clauses, where you have 2 independent clauses and they're joined by a comma and a conjunction, comma and or comma and but, or they're joined with a semicolon, those independent clauses need to be like complete sentences. And so although I say look at the red and green squiggly lines, don't trust the spell check, grammar check 100%. Just because it didn't find an error doesn't mean there's not an error, especially when it comes to spelling. Because if you spell a word incorrectly, but it's a word, so if you mean to say for, F-O-U-R, but you write F-O-R, Microsoft Word isn't going to know that, but it will still be an incorrect spelling. So don't just say, okay, well, if there's no red squiggly lines, then I'm good. You need to double check things yourself. To have someone else read through your paper. Once you get it all done, have a partner, a friend, somebody just kind of put eyes on it and say, you don't need to tell me if you think this is a good study or not. I just want you to read through and see, are there any sentences that don't make sense? Are there any misspelled words? Any sentences that are illogical or awkward? Have them look for those types of things, because they should have a knowledge base to be able to comment on that at least. Some advice on the individual sections. The main things I see in each section. For the introduction section, The biggest problem I see typically is a lack of transition between ideas. So usually ideas are separated into separate paragraphs. So look for transitional phrases at the ends or beginnings of paragraphs to make sure they're there. Kind of tell the reader why you're telling them this next idea. Is it a logical consequence of the previous idea, or is it something that's in contrast to the previous idea? So help the reader with context by providing transitions. In the method section, doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes still see people jumping to past tense as if they've already conducted the study. And you're writing a research proposal, so all your verbs should be in future tense. The sample will consist of. Participants will be given, not were given, because you didn't do this study yet. You're proposing to do it. And that's true throughout the rest of the paper as well. In the data analysis section, make sure you address the expected pattern results for all the tests and kind of all the groups. So if you have, let's say, 3 groups and you're doing a drug study, 0 milligrams, 10 milligrams, and 20 milligrams, you don't just say it's expected that the 20 milligrams group will do better than the 10 milligram group. You also need to mention the 0 milligram group. Will it be better or worse than the 10? Will it be better or worse than 20? So talk about all the comparisons that you would make. Talk about all your expected results. So it's expected that the group that receives 20 milligrams will show fewer symptoms on the BDI-2 than will participants who take 10 milligrams, and so on and so forth. And you talk at the level of the tests and level of numbers. Even though you don't have numbers, you can say the average score on certain tests, right? And that's in the data analysis section, which you'll say the same thing later in the discussion section, but you won't talk about tests and numbers. You'll talk more about concepts. So it's expected that participants who get higher doses of the drug will be less depressed, right? So in the discussion you say less depressed. In the data analysis you say lower score in the BDI. So there's the difference there. In the data analysis, it's at the level of measurement, and in the discussion, it's at the level of the concept or construct that measure is intended to assess. But the things you need to be sure and look at in the discussion, beyond restating the results in plain English, is to address limitations of your study. At least 2 to 3 ideas, more is better. But when you talk about limitations, almost everybody says, oh, well, the small sample size might be a limitation. Why is it a limitation? When you identify a limitation, talk about why it's a limitation. And it's a limitation in terms of it limits the conclusions you can draw from the study. Right? That's what's being limited. So, why? In what way will having a small sample, negatively impact conclusions you can draw? In what way will using, whatever test you used, limit the conclusions you could draw from the data that will be gathered? Okay. And for implications, again, 2 to 3 ideas, at least. More is better. And these can be implications for practical use. So if I find what I'm expecting to find, then people should do this. And if you're having a hard time coming up with enough ideas, you could also think about the other way. Well, and if I fail to find support for this, then people should maybe do this. Right? What's the next step if my results weren't in line with, weren't supportive of my hypothesis? In the reference section, I see a variety of mistakes. Check the manual. Don't trust PsycInfo's citing, because it's often wrong. But the most common one that I see, and I think it's because PsycInfo does it wrong, is don't capitalize all the words in the title of articles. And PsycInfo sometimes does this, sometimes doesn't. So you can't just cut and paste the thing from PsycInfo when you ask it to cite it, because it will do it incorrectly. So make sure you look at the manual yourself for a particular type of source, whether it's an article, book, chapter, web source, whatever, and make sure you're citing appropriately. Right, that's about it for things to look out for. Good luck finishing up, and I'm sure you're going to do a great job.